All right. So today we have Holly here all the way from Australia.
Hi,
All right. Why don't you introduce yourself?
my name is Hollie Bakerboljkovac. I live in New South Wales in Australia. I'm a clinical counsellor and I also have a martial arts school and a horse riding school.
Oh, it sounds like it keeps you busy.
Yeah, I'm busy.
When I guess with that, I guess you have to figure out how to manage your time well to do that.
That's the idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes
Uh,
it's easier than others, but that is the theory. Yeah.
right. Well, so I know one of the things that I know you often focus on is this idea of like sacred productivity. And I guess like, how do you define that?
Yeah. So, I mean, mostly I work with women. And one thing I was noticing was this movement towards, talking about how it's not cool to be busy, which I think is a great movement overall. But if we're not busy, if we're talking about not being busy when we are actually busy, that starts to create like a stress point, right? Because most women are busy, most people are busy. So I was thinking around like if if what if the things that we're busy with are actually meaningful? Then it doesn't feel like horrible busy work, right? Then we don't want to be hands off. We want to actually be able to get into those things and do them because we enjoy them. So sacred productivity is more in line with this idea that it's okay to be busy when what you're busy with has meaning for you and actually fills you up. Yeah, you can be energized by the busy if it's meaningful and authentic to whatever is important to you, which I guess is that sacred word, right?
Well, that sounds great. It definitely seems like a good philosophy because I think, definitely a lot of people are often very busy and, doing stuff maybe that either is necessary or they feel things necessary, but it then makes it hard to sort of find the time for things that are really meaningful.
That's it. Yeah. And so sacred productivity is more like, are you doing the things that are meaningful? In which case, be as busy as you want, because that will obviously fill your cup.
Right. And do you feel like the pandemic had a big impact on a lot of people in terms of this idea of kind of choosing things that are important to them to be busy with?
But obviously, yeah, I think that's something that came. I mean, I've been talking about sacred productivity since before the pandemic, but I think it is something that's just kind of mainstream the idea of doing what you love in a different way, and people, it's more accessible to people now. Something happened where a lot of people had a lot of downtime, and they found out that yeah, the way that they'd like to spend their time is not what they were doing before. So that just gives permission, doesn't it? Like self permission.
Right. Yeah. And I guess how do you like so for some if someone comes to you and says, I'm so busy, I have so much to do, that I absolutely have to do. How do I like actually find that time for myself? Like what might be something you might suggest to them?
I think one of the first points is prioritize. Like that's what I'm always talking about. And so, there might be 30 things that you have to do in a day. But if you don't prioritize what's the most important to you on that day, then you're just going to keep going around in circles. And what's important today might be different tomorrow. So prioritizing and reprioritizing regularly is really important because, seasons change, seasons of life change, situations change, your health changes, like all these sort of more minute things can shift you through the day. And that priority is going to shift based on that. And so if we address that rather than a list of priorities that's a lot more external than ourselves, it becomes something that, yeah, again, feels meaningful, feels like it's something that's worth doing.
Hmm. That makes a lot of sense. I mean, one of the things I see on a lot of the clients I work with is this idea it's hard to tolerate not being productive or to tolerate like not getting stuff done. I don't know. Do you see that a lot in sort of this that even if people are, doing things like in the meeting, like how do they tolerate that feeling of, oh, I have all this stuff on my do list that's not getting done?
Yeah, I love that word, tolerate. That's something I think about, like how much of a relationship someone can have with being uncomfortable, with being bored, and with being rushed. And then like working within that, like within that field of rushed to boredom and the discomfort of all of those things, because some people don't want to stop. Like you said, they need to tolerate not stopping, but also the the stopping is intolerable for some people too. Like it just goes both ways, right? So thinking about if you think your biggest priority is just to keep moving, then what's the momentum for? Yeah. So again, like looking at what's the meaning of it, what's the authentic reason that you're doing this particular busyness, productivityness, and checking in whether or not it actually makes sense to what you want on a bigger picture, like in your bigger vision, in a broader space of the world of how you want the world to be. Is this intolerable not busyness or intolerable stopping actually match what you want from the world? Does that make sense? I feel like
definitely. Like I think especially like a bigger level of being able to, I think in the moment, if you have stuff you absolutely have to get done, it's one thing, but I get at a bigger level, like, so you don't get in a position like forever, like in this position of like constantly doing the stuff you don't want to be doing.
Mm-hmm. And being busy for busy's sake, right? That doesn't help anyone.
Right. I mean, I think it also brings up, there's certainly people I imagine that stay busy because it provides a distraction from other stuff. But, or another way of approaching it too is the idea of if you get stuff done, then maybe, if you're stressed because you have stuff you have to get done, and the stress gets relieved when you get the things done, then that creates sort of another dynamic around how do you like prioritize and balance stuff. If it's a question of, I'm going to be more stressed because all this stuff on my to-do list I actually should do at some point didn't get done, versus if I do it, I'm not going to have downtime, but then I'm going to at least sort of have gotten stuff done and be more relaxed in theory.
Yeah. And have you ever noticed that sometimes there's a lot of little things on a list, but you just get one of those done and then everything feels like it's more spacious, like you actually have more time suddenly, even though they're all sort of equivalent in amount of time that they might take, or even in priority. Sometimes there's certain things that are making us stuck because they're maybe super uncomfortable, and then there's others that are just easy and you flick through them and it doesn't feel like anything's changed.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree. And I think that a lot of times for people, it's, essentially, even if something takes like a minute or two to do, if you can knock it off and have less things in a list, it's oftentimes less overwhelming. Or the same thing where if you're going to have, I don't know, like more than like, I don't know, I would say often to people, maybe like 10 things in like an electronic task list, it's often good to divide into a different list so that you're not looking at everything at once, but only looking at what you actually planned out to do that day.
Yeah, so I created a planner, and that's exactly the design of it. Is like there's only 3 things a day on those lists. You can fast forward and you can put other things on lists on other days, but they fill up really quickly anyway. But then you're only looking each day. You're only looking at like, what are the 3 most important priorities for this day for me, and it makes it a lot more achievable, right?
Yeah. But then what do you do about other stuff, like beyond like those most important things? Like, do you then plan out those other things as well in some way?
Yeah, for sure. When we say important priorities, that might not mean the thing that's most meaningful to me. It might mean like, we've got to take my kid to the doctor. Yeah. Like, I mean, your kid's important, obviously, right, but it's not the thing that like, makes your world sing. So there's got to be a balance, right? Is kind of what I hear you asking. Like, what's the in between like the things that you don't want to do and the things that you really want to do, and how do you get all those things done?
Right. And I think drawing the line between what are the things that are important enough that you also even write down in a list to like plan out and to get done, versus what are things that you usually remember to do, or it's not a big deal if you don't remember to do it, and kind of let it be. I mean, I think there's some people that, because I work a lot with people, especially in ADHD and executive function issues. So I work with a lot of people that have a hard time keeping organized and, getting stuff done, and like the getting started is really tough. And so with that, some people need, reminders of every little thing. Otherwise, just nothing gets done. For others, it's so overwhelming that, there's one, pick a couple big things and then use that as like the launching off point. And this, like the idea of, I don't know, remembering to check email for some people is enough. They don't need to, have as a task, but others that would not check email for days or more without it in a reminder list.
Well, and I think it like there's an element of practice, and there's an element of steps, like those bigger things we have to, that whole idea of breaking it down, but not just breaking it down into like these recognizable parts, but realizing that every way you want to go and everything that you want to be productive about has steps, and that you don't go from 0 to 100. So just because you want to make something happen, or you want a new car, or you want to live in a particular way, whatever it is, none of those things happen today. Like, they're little steps that we make. And as we start to pull in all those other little listy things that we have that seem irrelevant, they eventually will weave into the main, if it really is our priority, all those little bits get woven into getting us to get on those steps to the real big things that we want. That's the sacred part of the sacred productivity.
Right. Well, I think there's definitely an art to it. And in
Yeah, it's
terms of this,
practice.
right. Yeah. But I think it's also this idea we're talking earlier, was say like tolerating not getting every single thing in a list done. I mean, because with school, it's at some point, the end that there's end of semester and like there's nothing in the list. But I think in real life, it for most people, real life doesn't work that way.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. And because life changes all the time too, right? Like even when you think that you're about to get everything on your list, something else comes up. So that tolerating that discomfort or tolerating that feeling that I'm not valuable if I don't do or I don't get done is like, that's so much of the work. We could talk, I think there's plenty of books that tell you how to make the best goals and how to prioritize your time and 168 hours in a day and blah, 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 all that stuff in a week, sorry. But if we can't be with ourselves when we're stressed, busy, not busy, working towards something, then it doesn't actually matter, because we'll just continue on that cycle, on that wheel.
No, I agree. I think that like the mental health piece is crucial. That people are not going to function. Sort of if you don't sort of take care of yourself, and that's definitely vital towards even being productive down the line too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I wonder how much, like you said, like say for example for school, like most people have been through school and they've been shown that when you tick your things off your list and you're handing your right pieces of paper at the right time, then you're a good person. So how many of our values about ourselves are taken from those kind of frameworks in our lives that tell us like, if you do, then you're good. And so when we talk about tolerability, how do I tolerate this feeling of stopping when I've got nothing to do? We have to start asking ourselves, like, how do I tolerate this feeling of not having value if I'm not doing? And what does that mean? How do I find my value if I'm not doing, et cetera, et cetera?
Right. Because then it seems like it gets this idea of like, find the activities that if you want to do something, it's about doing the activity because of value, not just to keep busy.
Yeah.
But I mean, sorry, I think there's some people that sort of like to keep busy in general and others that just wish they were less busy.
Yeah. 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 And there's nothing wrong with busy. That was the whole point of sacred productivity.
Right.
Like,
or like, but basically being busy with maybe like not all aspects of what they're doing that they're enjoying.
Yeah.
Like, various household chores and things like that can take a while.
Yeah. Which we all kind of have to do. Like everyone's got something in their lives that they don't totally enjoy, but it kind of has to be done. Yeah.
Right. No, that's true. I mean, I think that's definitely an important point, that there are always these things that you have to get done. But, I always, I focus a lot of people on like the idea of like, for the stuff that you obviously have to get done, even if you don't really enjoy it, how can you be as efficient as possible with it to save time? So this way you have more time for the other stuff that's more enjoyable to do.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that efficiency thing can be a bit of an addiction too, though? Like getting more and more efficient?
I think that there's definitely that possibility. I mean, almost anything could be an addiction, I guess. But yeah, I think they're definitely where it kind of becomes over the top, where it becomes such a focus on like trying to get stuff done that, like, I think part of it looks at, I think about is like, what's the motivation behind it? So the idea that like, especially if you have like your life, things are very unpredictable. Like you have no idea what's going to come through. Like, especially if you're like, I don't know, a common example I can think about would be an IT person that deals with like, help desk tickets for computer issues that you have no idea how many are going to come through in a day. And if your primary job is, let's say, answering the ones that come through, but you have all this other stuff you have to do that just keeps getting pushed off whenever the help desk tickets come through. If you have a day where it seems kind of quiet, you're probably going to want to keep pushing through it, being efficient as you can. So that this way you don't get completely backlogged when suddenly there's a day where there's a ton of tickets. But at the same time, then you walk this fine line between the point of like being so focused on being productive versus the idea of like it being sort of logical and more helpful than harmful.
I think what I hear you saying is habits, right? Like you work out the habits that work the best, and then you stick with those as much as you can.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah, like it's about the idea of like not like, I think there's a place where it's beneficial to be efficient. But I think you also run the risk of either getting too fixated on it or also cutting corners too much sometimes. Because I think the idea of like, when I refer to efficient, the idea of like essentially like doing the best job you can optimally in the least amount of time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it's sort of like the idea, like people often, I see this a lot with teens, it's the idea of like multitasking. I mean, I guess even with adults too. Which, I mean, a lot of studies have shown that in most cases, you don't really do the best job at any of the things you're doing if you're doing multiple things at once.
Yeah.
but again, I think there's a time and a place for it in some way. So for example, I don't know, listening to a podcast while you're doing laundry, or
Sure.
something that really is not going to like directly, impact your productivity significantly enough, or it's not going to matter because it gets us that you're enjoying what you're doing so much that even if it takes slightly longer.
Yeah.
So
and then we could go into a whole conversation about if you're moving while you're learning or listening, then you're actually going to be more productive and efficient in your body to actually learn that information, right? So some things do need to be coupled together.
Yeah, and there are definitely benefits of that. I mean, like, because I see a lot with people with ADHD or even anxiety. Like, if there's a lot of fidgeting, like one of my big things with people is to help like harness fidgeting to improve focus. Because if you're moving anyway, if you do like physical stuff in like a controlled way, like an elliptical to your desk or like a balance board or something like that, then it allows you to actually like help yourself to certainly you're often calmer and you're more focused.
100%. I agree entirely with that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I found that. Yeah, I mean, I have a elliptical under my desk. Yeah, I use a lot throughout the day. I've got like various boards and stuff. I mean, I use them to like show people, but I certainly use them myself because I think they're really helpful.
Yeah, no, well, I'm sitting on a ball right now for the same reason. And I'm always wriggling. I always say to new clients, if they're online, like I'll probably be wriggling and moving and bouncing, and you're welcome to as well. And I think now what we're talking about is bringing the whole body into your productivity, which is
right.
That's a pretty new idea, I think, in terms of, that's not what people have been talking about around productivity for a long time.
Right. I think a lot of people are this impression they just sit. Right. And I think it's hard for people that can't do that. It's really hard to hear that constantly because it's, I think it's far easier said than done. And I think the idea too is I think in the past people would focus, like, especially with kids in HD, often the focus would be, stop shaking your legs, like stop doing that. But I think people have realized more recently is that one, just continue to stop it is not going to sort of necessarily make things better, but if you can harness it and like use the movement, and that's why I think like wiggle seats and all sorts of other things like that, in school have sort of taken off. I still think though that the one thing that has not taken off, and I agree why, is the fidget spinner. I feel like I remember when it came out because I think it was really mismarketing because it was really, I think, initially marketed for anxiety, and it was great because it was distracting, but it didn't help for ADHD. And then I think a sign that it was on its way out after I think pretty much every school has banned it is I think before the pandemic I'd seen it on clearance at a store.
Yeah.
And yeah. Just, a sign that it's,
and then
it's
they
on its way
sale.
out. But
yeah, for sure. But I feel like this conversation around including the body and being able to distract yourself or go in and out of something, right? Like using your body to come in and out, focus on the ball for a second, come back to the work, is a bigger productivity story itself, because like I work with a lot of ADHD people too, and what I try to say is something around like you don't have to do the one thing all the time. Like most ADHD people have more than one interest, and that's okay. And I think this sacred productivity framework really holds that, because you're allowed to have more than one priority. Your kids are one of your priorities, but so too is your gym work, and so too is your hobby this week that might change next week because you get bored of it. And like making that okay, making it doesn't have to be just one thing, just like you don't have to just sit down to prioritize.
Right. And it's the same idea too, where it's like you also often have to, even like in this, like if I don't know, like work with kids and work on like helping to sit still to harness fidgeting to get work done. Depending on how long someone's working on homework for, they may have several different seating positions or different places they shift around to, because trying to do the same thing for too long, even if it's sitting on a yoga ball or, sort of fidgeting with like foot pedals, sometimes they need that change. They can't just do the same thing over and over again forever.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it's just because everyone I work with is a little bit neurodivergent as well, but I just feel like, how does a brain do anything any other way? Like I can't imagine trying to just do the one thing all the time.
Yeah. Well, and I also think with the pandemic and increased use of technology, I mean, it also brings a question that I think people get even more trained to sort of multitask, and I don't know if that's necessarily good, but I think it is hard. I think that also it just primes people in a lot of ways to, be focused on being able to, certainly get, on the one hand, get stuff information very quickly, but also make it very easy to, I don't know, sort of have a meeting at the same time, like check email or respond to like a Teams message if they have a company and it's they're constantly getting message in that. So it's like it almost like on the one hand like gets people to try to do that, but then some people can keep up with that, some really can't.
Yeah.
It's also just a lot of information. It can be very draining emotionally. I think for like
Absolutely.
having to like navigate all of that stuff, and something I see too is a lot of this fatigue of this is just from like having to focus so long, takes so much mental energy that it's by the time like someone's done with work for the day and they get home, it's hard to sort of do much.
Yeah. Which is why I think we need meaning. We
Yeah.
need to be able to be doing meaningful things, because that gives us that re-energize, right? Like you can come back at the end of the day and feel rubbish, but if there's something that's really important to you, something that's creative, or your kids that you love, something that just inspires, then suddenly there's this whole new lease on energy that wasn't there before. So that's so important for us to have built into our lifestyle in some way.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, definitely gives you like a reason to sort of be motivated to do all the things you're doing, the stuff you like and the stuff you don't like.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And it feels like more balanced then, right?
Right. Well, and I also think it makes it easier to get through the stuff that you don't enjoy doing as much because you know that sort of you have all this other stuff that you do enjoy. And so it's only a small part of your life that of these things you don't enjoy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think also it's about sort of lifestyle that I think, with the pandemic, I think for a lot of people, I mean, obviously there are many negative things about the pandemic, but, for some people, I think it was also a wake up call and it became an opportunity to kind of like make lifestyle changes either temporarily or permanently. But, I think it
Sure.
definitely for some people changed that, being able to, be around more for their families, maybe get into a workout routine, sort of do things that they had wanted to do that they just never had time for in the past.
Yeah, for sure. I live in a small rural town, and like the population has exploded since the pandemic.
Yeah.
People leaving the city and realizing what they actually want, or maybe they knew they wanted it, but they thought they couldn't have it yet. And I think they just decided, well, I can't speak for other people, but I feel like one of the ideas that's behind it is, why not just do it now? Why wait?
Right. Like, I think
Know
it's the
what's
idea, like,
coming
if you like,
tomorrow.
you're right. Like, because you don't know, it's always, I mean, in reality, obviously, certain stuff you can't just like on a whim, every single thing you think, oh, today could be my last day. Let me just do this. But I think there is that idea of like, there's a point where you come where you just can't think, I can't just like continue to put this off forever. Like, I'm not going to get the enjoyment out of this if I don't do this soon.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's exciting. I mean, like you said, like there's a lot of terrible things that came out of the pandemic, but that part of it where people are, feel like they have more autonomy and can make choices that are meaningful to them, that's exciting.
Yeah. Well, it gives people a sense of control and like sort of take ownership back over their lives in a sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because also, I mean, I don't know what it was like in Australia, but here there's definitely a lot where it's, people that worked, had long commutes suddenly could work from home. And like some companies let people work from home permanently. And so for some people, it became like a permanent lifestyle change, whereas for others, it's also hard because, when things reopen up more, some people are sort of in like a hybrid model, some are still at home, some are back full time to what they're doing. But it's still this sort of this, sometimes having it back and like giving up these things that like were really nice from the pandemic.
Yeah, definitely. Very similar here, exactly what you said, that sort of mixed hybrid situation, I think, for a lot of people. But that I think time shifted because people had a new awareness of time, how long things took for, like you say, if you travel an hour and a half every day and then suddenly you make that hour and a half back, that changes the whole way you see a day. Like your whole structure is completely different. I was really excited seeing people just always online rather than that. I sort of do face-to-face half the time and online half the time. But through the pandemic, it was like I could be in my garden 2 minutes before a session and I could come in with dirty hands and my client wouldn't even know because I was online.
Yeah,
It was just so different.
Yeah, no, I had a similar experience. I mean, it was really nice because I could, well, especially earlier on in the pandemic, my kids were home, so I could basically, go play basketball with them if I had a break, or I try to time it when they had their, I guess, equivalent of recess time.
Yeah.
Sometimes and take a break, and or even if I need, I don't have as much that always piles up in the evenings because if I have an extra break during the day, I can actually just get stuff done at home as opposed to then coming home from the office and have everything because I work till like 9 a lot of the time. Like being able to then just have less to do is just definitely it's a better way of life. But also just I think getting more movement in throughout the day too. Of just I think it's different sort of being in an office environment the whole time, like versus like having that flexibility to like have more control over your space.
Yeah, it's
I think
exciting for the future.
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, it definitely like and for I mean, obviously there are some people where depending on what you're focusing on in person or for other factors works better, but I mean, at least I've had a lot of people work. I think for a lot, it actually works a lot better doing it virtually, because I think that it's, it saves time. Because like for a lot of the teams I work with, if you think about how long it takes them to come to my office, and the time they lose travel time for they're getting homework done. Because a lot of what I work with them on is helping to be more efficient and keep track of their assignments. They save so much time.
Yeah, and online training too, right? Like for me, because I live in the country, if any professional development work I want to do, I have to travel. So there's travel time, there's accommodation, that there's whole days just lost that you can't work. But it's like now everyone's thinking about how do they make their training online so that so many more people can access it. It just makes life so much easier.
Yeah, no, it's great. I mean, because I've done this one, I've done I don't know how many talks online for conferences and stuff like that, and certainly for the ones that were supposed to be like really far away, it was definitely the shortest commute I've ever had to present. I mean, it's hard. I think there's something that I think does get missed sometimes with presentations, like depending on what it is, like by not having the audience feedback. Like I find that to be sort of strange sometimes doing a presentation and like either not being able to see the audience, or like seeing various people like doing stuff on on their phone or some other thing, like half involved, engaged. But whereas in person, it's, I mean, certainly I guess I see that in person sometimes too, but I think it's just a different feel. But from Venus perspective, it's really nice. Just so I can have an appointment, and 5 minutes later jump on and do a presentation.
Yeah, and what I like, going back to thinking about that around the pandemic, what I tried to do with that extra time was not fill it with busy for the sake of busy, but fill it with things that I knew were actually meaningful for me, like that I maybe wouldn't have time to do if it wasn't this kind of setup at the time. So that, I think that's something I'm trying to carry forward even now. So there's liminal spaces, any in between moments. Can I, like, do I want to fill it with like a heap more paperwork, or do I want to fill it with something that's driving towards my vision, something that feels like it's worthwhile and it's in those top priorities? Because I'll still make time to do the paperwork eventually, but there's little spaces that I can capture, like you said, going out and playing basketball with your kids. Like, how do I still find those, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, I think it's about prioritizing, because it's like if like for me, like I'm probably like slightly different than that. Like the way that I would do with the paperwork is like I really hate when paperwork piles up. Like it really irritates me. Same thing with like emails. Like the last thing I want to see is like, I don't know, 30 emails I have to respond to at once. And so like for me, like I feel like I like strike like a good balance between basically taking time to like do the paperwork, deal with emails, but also like try to find that time to like have that time to like do stuff for myself as well. I mean, it's still a work in progress. I still think I definitely have a lot of room for improvement, but
Yeah.
but I think figuring out like when is the time to like get that stuff done for me so it doesn't pile up more, but at the same time also take that time, don't return that phone call that's not urgent right away, when I can return an hour later, and to take time to hang out with my kids around dinner time or some other time of day, or go for a walk if the weather's nice, or do something else that's meaningful and enjoy.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So this is all that practice, isn't it?
Right.
Practicing whether or not, it will never be perfect, but we just practice it, and those habits become more permanent, so that we don't have to be thinking about it so much. At the moment, you and I are both talking about it as though it's still a fair bit from our brain. We've got to really set ourselves some targets there. But eventually you get to a place, the more you practice, that it just is the habit. And you do the paperwork then, and then there's always space to hang out with those family members or whatever it is that you need to do, you want to do.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and I think just in general, I found like the more like you can just reduce clutter in general, like even not just physical, but even like all the notifications on a phone, like strange notifications on a computer, junk email, like all of it. Just I find it's just so much more like there's just something that's like, I don't know, like I find sometimes it's like there's this idea where I don't know, like it could be even it could even be like an actual like a workday morning, but if I'm not getting interrupted that much by phone calls or emails, I can like sit and like get done what I want, or take a few minutes and do something. There's just it's like this like calming and so peaceful. But it doesn't, in some ways, like I could have that feeling, I guess they're on a weekend as well, but there's something about the fact that it's not necessarily about like the time of day, because, I've had days where it's very different, but it's just something about like being able to like just either shut things off or not be interrupted that just leads to this like this calm, like productive feeling too.
Oh, totally. Totally. I don't have any dings on anything that I own. The emails, the phones, my phone's always on do not disturb. So I get to it when I get to it, and there might be like at the end of a workday there could be 20 messages there, but it feels I prefer to chunk those sorts of things that aren't that fun in the first place. I hate talking on the phone, so if I just chunk it all together and say that's the half hour that I'm going to check my phone, then that feels a lot easier than those constant rings.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan. I mean, I feel like I've done whatever I can to like minimize phone calls. Having to like, I in general have found like what I've done, I guess, in recent time is also because I find it a lot easier. Like if someone calls, most cases I'm not gonna be able to pick up anyway, so I have to call them back, and then it's trying to play phone tag. Whereas if I like have a way of contacting like a text or an email, and then I can say here are times I'm free, let me know what works for you. Then I don't have to deal with like calling. Plus, it allows me to have a sense before I even get into a phone call, like what to expect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or I've like set up more like online scheduling stuff too, to sort of minimize, experience phone calls when it's much easier to like be able to like, no, I'm going to go talk to this new person. I have the basic information on like what to expect, what they need from me. Whereas I think it's very different when it's a quick message, or sometimes you get a message, you have no idea what they actually want. They just say, here's my name, please call me.
Yes. Yeah. Those ones always get to the bottom of my list. If you don't tell me what you want, you probably won't get priority.
Yeah, but I think also even from like a prioritization standpoint, I think after a while, I don't know, at least for me, like I get, when I see a voicemail, I can often tell pretty fast, like if it's something that like is urgent, if it's something that's even a good fit for like what I do, in terms of it's a work related one, I can tell pretty fast if it's spam.
Yeah. What did we do with this level of technology? Remember when people just had like a ringing phone in their kitchen and they had to pick it up and answer it?
I can't imagine obviously with the pandemic, had there not been all this technology, it would have been a very different world.
Yeah,
but in general, just even there are still some clinicians I know that just or at least a few I can think of that like don't really use email for work and it's I can't. On the one hand, I think sometimes it cuts back on people contacting you because I think it's a lot easier for someone to just send an email about stuff rather than take the time to call. But I can't imagine like having to devote, I don't know how many hours it would take if I didn't have email, how much I'd be on the phone during the day rather than being able to actually work with people or like get other stuff done.
Yeah, definitely.
So this was fun. There's definitely really, really fun chatting. I guess like do you have is there anything else like you want to share or like either mention about yourself, or certainly I'd love for you to kind of tell us where people can find you and things like that, and anything like along those lines that you'd like to sort of share.
No, I think we covered a lot of the points that I think are important around sacred productivity, that autonomy and those questions around what is my self-value and how do I get past the discomfort of either being too busy or not being busy enough. All of that stuff we've done really well to talk about. And I guess I would just comment, you're in the Northern Hemisphere, so it's not so relevant probably to your listeners, but I have a planner that I created around this sacred productivity idea. And it's 100% based for the Southern Hemisphere because it's, rather than a linear diary, it's actually all cyclical and circular. And some of your listeners may or may not know that, the sun is at the highest point for you guys in the south, but it's at the highest point for us in the north. And so if I have a cyclical kind of plan and I'm looking at what is the most intense part of the day and what's the least intense, it looks different on a piece of paper for me than it does for you. So that's why I say it's only a Southern Hemisphere one. And we look at the seasons there too. So for us, winter is in June, but for you guys, obviously that's summer. So the idea of that is that we're starting to look at how to balance these things that you and I have been talking about today, Carey, like the stuff that's meaningful and the stuff that you have to do. And if we realize that the world actually is a balance of light and dark, hot and cold, all those half and half sort of things, then that is a kind of a framework to think about our own days planning as well, and our week and the whole year. We can split it into those seasons. So for example, in summer, we usually have a lot more energy in summer, right? The days are longer, that we're ready to go more intensely. For us, that's around Christmas time and the new year. So that sort of builds into the way that you would structure your year. And then in winter, like the days are shorter, you feel a bit more internal, you're not out in the world as intensely. So that all comes together in this planner. So that's a whole way of thinking about productivity that I think not many people are doing. And that's certainly that's a whole other podcast, right? We could talk about that for hours. But yeah, so that's the way, that's sort of the filter that I look at the productivity through. So if people are interested in that, you could take the Southern Hemisphere planner and make it make sense for you in Northern Hemisphere world. But I'm not making a different planner because it's hours of work every year
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah, well, that's cool though. I just never really thought about the difference in like the hemisphere and that piece of it.
Yeah, well, yeah, you guys don't have to because there's so many more of you, and everything is made for your world, not ours. We have to make our own down here.
But that's all. There's a benefit in each, sort of figuring out if making whatever fits for them, since one size doesn't fit all for most things.
100%. Yeah.
So, all right. And I guess if people want to find you, how can they find you?
Yeah. So I and that planner are at instituteforselfcrafting.com. Self-crafting is kind of the overarching brand that's focusing, instead of so much on prioritizing self-mastery, self-crafting asks us to be continually creating and producing things that shape and change based on the experience that we have at any time in our lives. So instituteforselfcrafting.com is where you'll find me. Or I'm just Hollie Bakerboljkovac on all the social places. And I'm sure your spelling will be right on that one, Carey, and they can look it up there on the link to their podcast.
I will make sure to copy and paste. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming on. So this is really a lot of fun.
Yeah, you too. I appreciate it. And I'd love to hear from people and, see what else we can all create together with these ideas, because you and I have got ideas, Carey, but there's so many things that other people can add to that. And I find that's the really exciting part of this work.
Yeah, no, definitely. I agree. All right, let me just,